Also, yesterday, June 25th, was the anniversary, 1 year anniversary of the massive Gen Z uprising in Kenya, of people also rising up against capitalist exploitation, inequality, police brutality, and political corruption. And there were also massive protests that swept the country again yesterday, especially in the main city of Nairobi. I mean, just massive, massive, massive crowds. And to talk more about what took place there and what's coming next, we are very, very happy to be joined in the show once again by Booker Omole, who is the General Secretary of the Communist Party Marxist Kenya. Booker, as always, thanks so much for joining us here on the show.
Thank you very much, Eugene. And it's a pleasure to be back to Breakthrough News, especially, at this interesting time when the Kenyan masses are experiencing acute imperialist crisis. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And it's an honor to have you here. And maybe let's just start there. I mean, what's the meaning of what took place yesterday? I mean, it was such a massive event. I mean, it seems to portend a very significant sort of level of discontent and willingness to fight amongst the broad masses there in Kenya.
Yesterday, we had a big social explosion in the street where millions of young people turned out in large numbers to commemorate the martyrs of last year's uprising. Remember, last year, on the same date, which was June 25th, the current government murdered 61 young people when they ran over parliament after a big anti-IMF, anti-World Bank campaign, which had drafted the Finance Bill 2025. So, and the state repression and police brutality has been on the rise. Remember, just in the run-up to this commemoration and celebration of the youth uprising, the martyrs, the state has been very lethal. In the essence, some of the young people that were, even just criticizing the state on the social media had been arrested and even murdered in jail. So yesterday's protest was actually a nationwide protest to actually bring a clear message to the current regime that they are not welcomed, that they have not been able to carry out the tasks that they set for themselves in the last elections, and that they have continued to implement an anti-people policy, particularly perfected by mainly the World Bank and IMF, to make sure that austerity measures are even more reinforced, to make sure that only anti-people rules, all the policies, government of the day. And yesterday, the Communist Party Marxist was also on the streets to make sure that, we direct the anger, consolidate our organization, and even to recruit more people into the organization. So it was a big a success for the people. The ruling class, for the first time, could not, engage through its violence to make sure that it suppressed the people, because they had murdered several youths just before this commemoration, and even promised more violence against anybody who attempted to challenge this kind of, police brutality. So that is what was happening yesterday in the streets. The demonstrations will continue in the next couple of days, even couple of weeks, until the state repression can be crushed. This is what the Kenyan population are determined to make sure that there is a counter power of the people, not just to keep check, but to currently challenge this neo-colonial entity, mainly the puppets of the United States imperialism that continues to manage their Kenyan affairs on behalf of the dominance class of the dominance class in the United States, and not in the interest of the majority of the Kenyan people, Eugene.
I'm curious if you can talk a bit about more about some of that repression because it's been quite brutal. I mean, we're talking about just shutting down entire TV stations, basically imposing a media blackout, firing live ammunition. What does that say about the nature of this particular government? And can you also maybe talk a bit about what it is that have has pushed people to the brink? Because to be able to stand up to such a violent government, they have to have pushed you to be willing to really put yourself on the line.
First of all, it's important to acknowledge that the people who are going to the street are not just going to challenge a brutal government. The people are already in very extreme conditions where they live, and they cannot in any day live that miserable life without coming out to exercise their right to challenge the government that has condemned them in this extreme poverty. Sometimes the ruling class and a privileged few people want to indicate as if it is uh, the people just love to be on the streets to bring, anarchy, as President William Ruto and his supporters will want to portray. But the majority of the Kenyan people are living in very extreme poverty. And some 70% of the Kenyan population still live in the backwardness of the rural life. And the few people that lives in the cities, 30% of that population that lives in the cities, only about less than 1% live in what we call non-slum areas, while the other 29% actually lives in the informal poor neighborhoods in Nairobi. So to exercise their right to come to the street and to make sure that they can confront the state brutality is much better than them staying home to die of hunger or curable diseases. This is what is inspiring the people. The people are going to the streets because of their daily realities, and the government of the day is incapable to actually solve the problems of the people because capitalism, in actual sense, the indirect imperial rule that has imposed upon the Kenyan people, is unable to give people jobs with dignity. The indirect imperial rule that continues to sustain this neo-colonial system is incapable to give people medicine. It's incapable to give people education. So for that reason, even the majority of the people now that goes to the street to demand this government to offer services, the message that the Communist Party Marxist continues to insist on is that the only option available for the Kenyan people is to carry out their revolution to its conclusion, to make sure that they can complete their independence and declare Kenya a sovereign republic and start the immediate project of building the national economy, in the farmest ground to socialist construction. This is important for us to acknowledge. And as we have seen before, maybe it will shock the viewers, but the police, the extrajudicial police killings in Kenya is not something new. In fact, there is data to showcase that extrajudicial killing is one of the major ways in which the youth lose their lives in Nairobi, not even on the natural causes or other diseases, but the capitalist crisis in our country, the imperialist crisis in our country, has made life so extremely difficult for the majority of the people. There is a lot of young people that have been alienated from production. They cannot even access the dignity to have a job to practice what they went to do in school. So this is the challenges that is facing this current regime, and the current regime do not know exactly what to do because remember, almost the money that is being collected is being used to pay the illegitimate and the odious debt that still bodies like IMF and World Bank claim for Kenya to actually owes them. So at the end of the day, as long as the government remains a puppet government of the United States. They are incapable even to come up with decisive policies to challenge those that are imposed upon the Kenyan people by the United States hegemony. In that case, they are incapable to carry out any pro-people policy. And when we see people that are coming to the streets and there's a lot of chaos in Nairobi, it only means the desperation and the burning desire for the majority of the Kenyan people to live a life with dignity, and no amount of police killings or jails will stop the people from Kenya to fight, to expand this democratic space, and even for the fall of the entire neo-colonial system, and to breathe life to a new project, which we call the sovereign republic, the People's Republic of Kenya, which is, devoid of any indirect imperial rule that continues to run the affairs of Kenya only for a few people, the dominance class within the global north.
One of the things that I saw yesterday in the protest that I think really brings home, the point you're making of the role of Kenya being really a puppet in the sort of broader US-led imperial system, is that the tear gas canisters, or at least a number of the tear gas canisters that were being deployed, at least appeared to be of Israeli origin, which just felt like it said a lot about the nature of the Kenyan government and its repressive apparatus, which of course to me also reminds me the fact that Kenya is frontline of the US neo-colonial attempt at further occupying Haiti. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that, because it seems like not just at home, but abroad, President Ruto is really holding himself out as someone that can be counted on to line up with the US geopolitical agenda.
First, the Kenyan government, particularly the current administration, in both content and form, are always aligned to the dictates of the United States and their military outpost, which is the Zionist entity, Israel. And it will not shock you, because Israel was able to build itself an image in the African continent as an invisible army, in the sense that the majority of the African dictators before last year's event and the current retaliatory, attacks by Iran, Israel had been able to sustain an image that they are the security experts in Africa. And they have gotten into certain military arrangement with not just the Kenyan government, but the majority of the Eastern African countries, with a view to embed the Kenyan military with the Zionist military and the United States military. And that also entails supply of equipment, supply of other materials like tear gas and other ways that you can repress people who are freely expressing themselves. This is what Israel is experienced for, to make sure that they can suppress any uprising of the Palestinian people that will want to just defend their right to statehood, right to land, right to their dignity. So the Kenyan government has been able to take certain, examples from Israel to repress the Kenyan people, and other than that, to also use materials that they are procured from the Zionist entity to make sure that they could suppress the Kenyan uprising. No wonder each and every time we are facing elections, the Kenyan politicians pay homage to Israel. They go there to negotiate for arms, to finance their political project, to make sure that they can sustain the Zionist so-called invincible image. But fortunately now, Zionism cannot hide. The Israel image is totally tattered. The Israel army is not invincible anymore. The Iron Dome and the Third and David's Link has already failed. So the best of the American technology has, crumbled down in the face of us in the occupied Palestinian territory, in the so-called Israel. So this is a new realization of a country that has been able to build its image through deception and even through divide and rule. And now we can see themselves exposing themselves. And before too long now, we have tear gas canisters written "Made in Israel." And we can see how our government is quite complicit with the genocide that is taking place. Because remember, President William Ruto, the imperialist puppet, came out to say that a white settler establishment like Israel has a right to defend itself. This is total complicit, even when the International Criminal Court, which our president was one time indicted of for instigating tribal violence in our country, now he actually supports one of the indictees of this court and brings it out clearly that Israel has a right to defend himself. Why would a land grabber has a right to defend the land he has actually stolen from the natives? It's incredible. So we know for a fact that there is interrelationship between the Zionist project and the governments in the African continent. But the majority of the African people that knows the pain of settler colonialism, that know the pain of land grabbing, that knows the pain of dispossession of the land, cannot forsake the project of the Palestinian people. In fact, we have seen a lot of solidarity in African continent to call out Netanyahu and his killers, that they are carrying out a genocide, and that the African continent remains shoulder to shoulder with our brothers and sisters in Palestine.
Well, the Communist Party Marxist Kenya has been on the front lines, will continue to be on the front lines and pushing towards the National Democratic Revolution. Booker Omole, you are the General Secretary of the Communist Party Marxist. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Sure. You're welcome. Bye-bye.